happy Thursday, because it's Thursday. I'm pretty sure I do this just so I can keep track of the days of the week. I also have a calendar that I actually cross days off on now, mostly. It hasn't been crossed off since like Monday, so I got to work on that. All right, this is the fourth and final day of doing reading to actually effectively learn something, and this is where we put all the pieces together. So quick review. Step 1 was making a plan so you knew what you were doing. Step 2 was how to read a section effectively and create an outline so you are organized. Step 3 was using recall methods to make sure you could remember not only what's in the sections that you read, but also the previous sections when you read new ones so you don't immediately forget. And then step 4, putting it all together. So at this point, depending on the length of the piece, you might have been reading all week to get like a chapter done. It might have just been a day, but you broke it up into sections. It might really have not been that long at all. But what's important is that you're going to need this piece of information at some point later. So here are the things that you'll do when you're done with the whole thing and kind of in the future. So first of all, when you finish the whole thing, scan back through it. This is good just to cement things into your brain, but also to put the pieces together. Go all the way back to the beginning of whatever it is you read, and you don't need to like reread it, but kind of scan through it, make sure that it's recognizable to you, that if there are any really particular things like figures or stuff that you had definitely noted them, and scan through it while looking through your outline at the same time to make sure that all of that makes sense. So you're going through your outline and you're going through the reading just to make sure that you understand those things and that you've page number marked in your outline, everything that's important. Make sure there's nothing in your outline you don't understand or you don't immediately remember. You should mark those things or you should double check them. So if you wrote something down in your outline yesterday or the day before and you look at it now and you're like, what the heck was I thinking? Now's the time to go check on that before you realize you've completely lost it. So make sure that you do that. That's one of the key things for sure. So next is go back to your original goals. Make sure that you have accomplished the goals of the reading. So if the goals of the reading were to have terminology, make sure your outline has all the terms you need. If the goals of the reading were to learn to solve problems, make sure you have noted the steps of problem solving and the important things you need to do for problem solving. Make sure you have what you need. If the goal is that you'll be able to reference this material later for an online test or a take-home thing or an essay, make sure you have things noted where you can check on them and maybe even use the post-it note tabs to make sure that your book or article actually has the pieces where it should be. So those are all key. You got to make 100% sure that all of this makes sense and is together and is sorted. Make sure your outline has a home. If it's digital, if it's online, then make sure it has a home where at least you can find it again and it has, a good title or something so you can search it if needed. One of the things I love about using Google Docs, not an advertisement, they definitely don't pay me, is that you can search all the words in the document. So if I'm trying to find something and I'm not sure, but it has some very distinct terminology, I can search that and it will come right up. It's great. But I also use folders and actually organize my documents so that I can find them. So notes for a particular class or notes for a particular concept or item or committee all go in one place. Okay, so now what are you going to do with this information for the future? Well, this partially depends on the goals. If the goal was to have this as a good reference item and you only need a few main points for something, your outline is probably more complete than you need. File that away, but take that and turn it into a list of shorter points that you can reference as needed. So I do this a lot with my sort of nonfiction reading, is if I see something I like, I will make a list of just sort of the highlights of it if I want to just go back and reference what I'm doing to that or just as a reminder. So sometimes they go into sort of a reminders area, or if I'm currently kind of working with them, especially if it's health and fitness stuff, it'll go sort of in my current daily plan, a few of the notes from it, or go back and look at this. If your goals involve needing this material for something coming up or in the future, then you need to have a plan to re-reference it much more consistently. So even though your outline gets stored away, you might need to create, again, a shorter version of a document that you can use for recall practice in the future. So if your goal was terms, You're going to need a document in which you have listed the terms so that you can practice them or so you can remember to practice them. And don't forget, you don't want to look at the term and read the definition. You want to look at the term and say the definition out loud, or write the definition, or think the definition in your head. I still like flashcards for this, but a list of words with nothing next to them that you have to remember serves a similar purpose as long as you have the outline to go back to and reference if you forget them. And then be prepared to do that every few days if you're in between reading and a test, or maybe a little bit longer depending. So if this is something that is supposed to last you for the whole semester, maybe once a week you want to make a plan to go back through this. Each of your materials are, hey, let's actually do a recall review once a week. By this point, you should have gotten the pieces stuck, so now you're just going back to them. Okay, so what if your goal was problem solving? If your goal was problem solving, then again, you'll need to have some kind of plan to practice that skill and have the steps that you need. So you might want to create sort of a side note or a side page of cheat sheet of steps to solve a problem. But then also, before you put the reading completely away, find a bunch of problems and get them somewhere, or find a place that has problems that you can continue to check in on once every few days or once a week, depending on how rapidly whatever the exam you're doing or item is coming up. Make sure you have that. The other thing you might do is the same as we were talking about earlier, is making yourself a list of leading points of things you need to remember. So it doesn't include the points. So you're sort of making a shorter version of your outline because it's not including the items that you're supposed to remember, just the reminder of what they are. That might be a good way to go in biology. So for instance, if I was talking about chemistry, I might want to say, what are the 3 bonds? And I need to be able to describe them. I would also need to be able to describe their differences. But 3 bonds would be a good starting point on a short outline, and maybe put their names underneath it so I could follow it along but cover things up as I go. And then I might move into something like, what are the macromolecules? And what are their properties? Just enough to remind me of what I need to know so I can go back and look at it. The key is to understand when you're going to need the material and to put it away in an organized place so you can find it, but also have a shortened version that you can keep if you're using it consistently and constantly. So you've got your sort of long-term bookshelf version of organizing where you've got the actual book on your bookshelf. Then you've got the long form organized notes if you need to reference them, and the short form pieces of notes if what you're doing is making sure you're going to be able to pass an upcoming test or exam that is in front of you at least once a week between whenever you stop reading and the exam, more quickly if either it's a more important item or it's coming up faster. So that's really it. At this point, I will have finished the Effective Reading for Learning document. I'll put all of this together. I think I might also try to cut all of these pieces of video into one thing at some point. So hopefully you will now be better at reading to learn something instead of just reading and going, I think I read that. Good job. All right. So now my favorite gear shift to COVID-19 stuff. So a quick side note from yesterday's where I talked about a very specific study that was a meta-analysis of hand washing studies that I don't think included very good data. I have a fairly recent, not peer-reviewed print of another article that has a lot of stuff in it, and it's a much more comprehensive review type article in that it references a whole bunch of different types of studies and does some back logic connecting. So again, we are not going to have any data on the immediacy of does this work in specific locations, in population-based things and stuff like that for this disease because it's very new. But I do like the way that this puts things together and gives you lots and lots of references to back up and look at. So I'm going to also link this article. I do want to continue to remind people that anytime you're modeling, it's a model. It depends on a lot of factors and a lot of assumptions, and it's not 100% in either direction. It could be better or worse at any point in time. But I will link that. And as a note, since something like that is one of those won't hurt you, but may not help, so don't think it's the be all end all, I do those things when I'm in the right situations. So it's like if I'm going to go to the grocery store, I'll put something over my mouth, even if it's just to make everyone else feel happier. When I go running, though, not so much. Okay. So the partner pointed me to a Washington Post article that I think is one of those things that does that. What does science know? How does the media portray it that I really like? And I like the Washington Post, so don't get me wrong. If I'm going to read something, I usually read their stuff. But this is one of those ones where it's like, why doesn't every paper everywhere have actual scientists reading through their materials? And it's because nothing would ever get printed. But this is important. So the title of the article is Autopsies Find First U.S. Coronavirus Death Occurred in Early February, weeks earlier than previously thought. It's like, wow, that's super important, right? It's a real long article, so we're not going to go through the whole article. So I want to know where this information comes from and who has it. So that's always my key and most important thing. So Good News article gives me it right away. It says 2 people who died in early and mid-February had contracted the coronavirus, health officials said, signaling the virus may have spread and been fatal weeks earlier than previously thought. And these are people who died at home in Santa Clara County on February 6th and 17th. And they thought it started up in Washington. So now I go through the article to actually see what I can find. And we find quotes from the people who are involved. And they note that this could be very significant and it could be meaningful. And it says it is not known how the 2 people became infected, but they're thought to be community transmissions. They don't know of any travel history, anything like that. They had not been given tests when they were alive. This, by the way, is a kind of key important thing because it tells us something that they're saying things here. Now, it doesn't mean these people didn't have it, but if you didn't do the test when they were alive, we don't actually know if they had replicating viral RNA when they were alive. That's really important. So what I'd like to nail this down to is not what we can assume from it. Medical professionals should absolutely be looking at this, trying to figure it out, looking into it. But when I finally look up the one piece of information that I have, which is the press release from the county of Santa Clara, which actually says that they identified 3 individuals who died with COVID-19 in Santa Clara before the death on March 9th. And it doesn't give me the information about the other 2. It says that they performed autopsies on 2 individuals who died at home and samples were sent to the CDC, that the tissue samples were positive for SARS-CoV. That is a scientific approximate fact. As a note, the tests aren't perfect, but they are much more likely to give false negatives than false positives. So I would agree from a factual standpoint that the tissue samples provided from the autopsies of these people would contain the virus. And then they confirmed that an individual who died in the county on March 6th died of COVID-19. Now, they don't give me any more information about that. But from a human being, regular person standpoint, you don't have any more information on this. These people could have died from COVID-19, and it could have been circulating much longer than people have expected, and it could have caused these problems. No discount there. Do I have that data to say that? No. Do I think that the Washington Post actually has that data to say that? Not based on this article. They're crediting people who say they think this, and then other people who say other stuff related to it, but nobody's actually saying we have straight up evidence that that's 100% these people died of, and we're pretty certain it was definitely circulating. So, as a note, those are important things. Also, Santa Clara County is the county in which they were doing the antibody testing that The numbers on that are highly questionable. So there's a lot going on that's kind of funky. But anyway, the point here is not to say, oh my God, this has been around for months and weeks before we thought it was, which is an inherent problem because we don't know the answer to that. Just that 2 people who died earlier than expected were found to have viral RNA when autopsies were done and tissue samples were taken. Scientific fact, scientific assumption, which is where we say, well, these facts seem like they could lead to, and general assumption are totally different things, and that's important. So do I think that the medical professionals and scientists should be looking at this and figuring it out and trying to make a decision about it? 100%. Do I think announcing it to a lot of people and having long Washington Post articles about how crazy everything has been? I'm not so sure. I kind of worry when we do that because then people are like, no, no, no. And then you start to have the people who are like, well, I had this respiratory infection in December and January, and maybe I had something. We're pretty sure that's not true based on epidemiology and other things. So look for facts. Don't look for headlines. And don't go beyond what we know until you actually have the data to say that. That's really what's important. What do we know? We know this thing does transfer fast and does have a long incubation period in which people don't have symptoms but can pass it. So staying away from each other is still important and still makes sense. Do we know that it was circulating at that point in time and that these people caught it and that that's what they died of? I don't. You don't. Somebody might. But that's important. So that's how we deal with science. We don't overstate the science. We don't understate it. By the way, New Yorkers, yes, cats may be infected. I think I posted an article about that a while ago. We've known that for a while. Still no on dogs, so don't, get too excited yet. Okay. That's my how to read your science and your news articles for the day. If you want me to look at a scientific article or a news story about COVID, send it my way.